His dad, granddad, great-granddad, many of his uncles worked as pumpers for Roughnecks. Currently Rick is president of Fred's Energy Partners LLC. His goal is to develop new resources, play ideas, and use advanced geoscience, engineering, and analytical methods. He started his career in 1977 working for Exxon in the development of geology in South Texas, and later on exploration geologist for Mid-Continent. Rick became president of Sarah Corporation and supervised major exploration research projects in the United States and in the Middle East and Africa. He's also past president of the AAPG from 1999 to 2011. As executive director, responsible for the management of the AAPG headquarters in Tulsa and for the oversight of members programs for 34,000 members worldwide. Mr. Fritz. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, we'll start out. This table doesn't count. Who can tell me where this delta is? A picture of a nice large thick delta. Who can tell me where that's from?
Mars.
Yeah, that's from Mars. Believe it or not, Mars rover has been out there looking at things. So my talk's about delta. But before I talk about deltas, I'm going to talk about family a little bit. There we go. So this is my family from Arkansas, and this picture was taken in 1914. And you can see it's kind of an interesting picture when you look at it. My great grandpa there is in the center, and my great grandpa on the left. They had 10 kids, and they all look real happy, don't they? But a traveling photographer came by and took this picture. I just love the way they're posed. This is my grandma here, and she was a hoot, and they all played musical instruments. You see my Uncle Perry back there has a banjo, and old Red here, he played for Bob Wills. He was one of the fiddle players that would play with Bob Wills, and so my grandma would say, well, I play guitar at the dances, and that was before I became a Christian. So she'd always say, point that out to me. I said, that's all right, Grandma, it's okay. So it's a lot of fun. I have a band right now, it's called Jam and Geo, so that music tradition continues on. But I wanted to show you this because at about a year after this picture, they took off and moved to pretty much the area where Statue Lake is. And they began to farm the land there, the nice part of the land. And they all began working in oil fields. And they had a lot of mules, and they would use their mules to skid equipment. So my dad was not far from here. My dad was a pumper, and my granddad was a pumper, and my great-granddad was a teamer, they call them. Sounds like a John Denver song, doesn't it? And the teamer was a men who would take their mules and skid the equipment. There's a lot of equipment like tanks and rigs they didn't have wheels, they just skid them around. So that's where I get my start in the oil and gas business. And so anybody tell me what a CPU is? Central pumping unit. Yeah, not a central processing unit. It's this is a central pumping unit. Have any of you ever seen one of these run? Yeah, powerhouse, we call it. Powerhouse. And it was, so we took a line between Hominy and Barnesville. We were halfway in between, out in the middle. Out there, and my dad had 2 powerhouses that he ran as a pumper. And I can remember that thing. It's a crazy device. You got, I guess I can use my arrows. You can, it's, first of all, let's see. I don't have the trigger. Anytime I get the trigger up here,
Thank you.
Bottom left-hand side, you got it?
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
I tried to make this font as small as possible.
So this is how you start this thing. Is you jump up, you just run up and jump on this flywheel, and you bring the wheel around about halfway and it backfires and takes off. And then that's how you do it. It's about a 6 foot, this is smaller than the one my dad had. And then this is the, this big rubber band comes around it, and there's it looks like a bicycle wheel on its side, and it has an offset cam on the bottom that changes the radio power to, you know, to go linear and puncture wells. It was actually very efficient, and we had here's some of the old tanks. But my uncle had this for my dad, and they found him one morning. He had drank a little too much the night before, and had a hangover, and jumped up on the thing and didn't get off quite quick enough, and they found him up on the rafters. He was okay, he just was stuck up the rafters from it. My dad went out there one time, I saw him jump on that thing, it was muddy, and his boot hit it, and it went through, his boot went through the spoke, and it rocked over, but he hadn't enough power to really get it going. So that's what I was raised around. I was raised around these things. It's a wonder I wasn't killed. But I've been in the around the oil business. I remember seeing my first geologist, and they were dressed so fancy, and they had a nice car, and I decided, hey, I'm going to get out of the family business and go into geology. So we're going to have a walk through geology today. So it's kind of a geology lesson, and you're welcome to stop me at any time and ask me, what is that? And so please feel free to do so. And the first thing I'm showing you is a chart that shows the rock in Oklahoma, and it's stacked on top of each other. And we're going to talk though about the Pennsylvania. And the Pennsylvania is primarily the Cherokee, what they call the Cherokee cyclic system. It's a series of sands that are very, very cyclic. And it's got, we're going to really talk about Red Fork and the Bartlesville. Now, I belonged to a company, ran a company called the Corp, and we did a lot of big studies for companies. And we did a big study on the Red Fork back in the late 80s. And it should have been entitled, a Gary Larson cartoon where geologists go crazy. Is we decided in the past, these studies, we would look at maybe a couple thousand wells. With the Red Fork, we decided to look at 30-some thousand wells. And that's a lot of wells to go through. And not only that, we divided them into their various components, and we took net sand, net porosity, and kept all that data in environment. And so the Red Fork was popular at the time, and so we started to work on the Red Fork, and we were the first ones to actually put the delta together. A lot of people suspected the delta. This is a map, if you're looking down all of Oklahoma, and this is the Red Fork Delta. Okay, so it's a huge, it's not very thick compared to other deltas, but it's a huge delta. So we're back up in here right now, up in Osage County. And, but that's the way the delta looks. And a little later I'll show you how the delta, how it looks if you built it across through there. But these are the core, the stars are core. So this is core taken out of the ground, and we looked at about 40 core. That's a lot in a project like this. It's a huge, huge project. And from that, we began to understand what the rock looked like, what the facies looked like in the Red Fork. And we can apply it to the Bartlesville, because we saw a lot of Bartlesville as well. And it's essentially a very dirty rock. Okay, so these are on the right is a core, just a picture of what the core looks like. And when you pull it out, you can see your sandstones, and then you see your shales here. Okay, and these are usually about this big around, about 3 inches, 3.5 inches, and you get a very good feeling of the facies of the reservoir when you look at core. That's looking at rock that's a geologist's favorite thing. And so, and this is feldspar. This is photomicrographs, really close, up pictures basically of the core, of sections of the core. And it's just dirty. It's got a lot of quartz in it, but it's got a lot of polycrystalline quartz, it's got feldspar, it's got metamorphic rock fragments, sedimentary rock fragments. And at first, we were trying to figure out, if you're a geologist, you're looking at how dirty this is, you think about provenance, or where did the sands come from to be that dirty? So we were thinking the answers were Rockies and so on. But as it turns out, John Shelton, we were working with, he showed us a core from the Mississippi Delta, and it was just like this. And so, a lot like this. And so that dirty rock fragment can travel quite a distance. So it's important for you to think of, this isn't like dirty dancing, but it's like dirty rock, okay? It's really dirty rock, and we'll talk about that, why that's important, but it really is very important. And that's what makes it such an interesting reservoir for future development. And so from that, we decided on these environments. And so these are models that we got from the Corps and so on of these different environments. And so it starts out with alluvial valley, any delta, and then it goes down, and finally in the lower right is out, it's deeper water, okay? And that's in the Anadarko Basin. You don't see that around here. Here, everything's alluvial valley. Okay, that's the early part of the delta. Any questions yet? Any answers? No answers? Because I prefer answers, actually. So this is what the log shape looks like. So you've seen some log shapes today. And we can tell from the log shapes, if I look at the core, look at the logs, we get a feel for what the rock should look like in the subsurface. Now, here in this area, in Osage County, it's pretty much all alluvial plain up in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, it's stacked channels, incised valleys, and so on. And as you move down into the Anadarko Basin, you get these big valley fills, but you also get estuarine deposits. Dr. Al-Shaib at Oklahoma State was helping us look at the score at the time, and I remember how excited he got when he saw his beloved glauconite in the estuarine sand. Glauconite is an indicator for estuarine. But at this point in the study, we spent probably 6 months at least. And so we pretty much understand the rock, we understand what the facies are, what the depositional environment is. We understand what the what the log pattern should look like. So when we look at logs, we can get a pretty good feel of what type of sand it is, type of reservoir. So I'm going to start with a slide stolen from Chris Cunningham of the Burbank field. And the main, I'm not going to get into detail here. I'm just showing you what a stack system looks like. This is mostly red fork. If any, I think some people put little barbels at the bottom, but I think it's mostly red fork because it's incised and we cut out the barbels to it. But it's an incised channel, and it has a lot of sand stacked on top of each other. Stack, 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 just like I was showing before. I don't remember back in this or not. Yeah. See on the upper left-hand one, that's what they look like, stacked sands, multiple sands, and that's what these are stacked sands here. Okay, and that's what the alluvial valley looks like. So I'm showing you, what I'm doing is showing you parts of the delta now, and I'll show you the whole delta here pretty soon. This is to the west of us. It's called the Waukeeta Field. For years, this was a huge argument of what this was. And Bill, do you remember that argument? There's people wanted to call that a barrier bar. So bad, that's a big bar. And I said, that ain't a bear. It's or bar either. It's but because of the shape of it, people thought it was something like a Galveston and thought it was a bar. But if you look down to the bottom down there, it's an incised valley fill in the Cherokee. So it cuts down, which bars don't, if you're a geologist, you know the bars don't do that. So it's this is the Cherokee Waukeeta field. And then this is the Cheyenne Valley field. We're in the Anadarko Basin now. Okay, so I'm showing you, looking at the whole delta. Here you're on the upper part of the delta, and there's not a lot of accommodation space. And so the channels are pretty straight for the most part, and they don't move around a lot. But as you go down from Cheyenne, And we're at Shine Valley's this is 16 West, 17 North, 17 West at Putnam Field. Here you see how the channels go back and forth. They call it anastomosing. I had to say that because I can say it. But it just means that they move around a lot. You know, and it's because they have so much accommodation space, the channels can move from place to place without crossing another channel so much. And this is South Thomas Field, which looks a lot like that delta I showed you from Mars. It's a bird's foot delta in the Red Fork. So we're staying in the Red Fork here, and then finally the last is the East Clinton Field, and we're back in a valley field, and this is where you had a lowering sea level, and you had a big incised valley, and then it filled back up. The exciting part of this on the upper part here, excuse me, for geologists, is it's filled back in with a estuarine deposit. So the seas went down, the valley fill was made, seas came back in, and filled that in with some estuarine deposits. So, and those actually are where the best reservoir is in this whole play. So, all right, are you excited about geology yet? We've got, so here's the type log. You know, so we look at, there's geologists, we often, we have to reinterpret things because we get new data, right? So often we are found looking at a cap looking at a new gate when we see more data. But this is the type log for the Red Fork, okay? And I picked the type log where there's no sand. Basically, there's no sand, so you can see the sequence better when you have that. And so we just called it, we could see 3 different sections. We call it the lower, middle, and upper. And each one of these are developed in a certain way. So I'm going to show you a model now on how these were actually developed. Just take one, for example. This is really based more off the Bartlesville. So we're back over. You see the red area there is actually Lincoln County. So Osage is back up here. And there's a Nemaha Ridge, which is in the middle of Oklahoma. And it was Archi off to the east. And so it starts out with a transgression. The seas come in. So this big arrow here means that the seas are rising as it comes in. And they often deposit a black shale, a transgressive black shale. And then as they come in, oops, wrong way. Come in further, they build a transgressive limestone. And this is this, and so look, you can see it building here on the left. Then it develops shallow marine shales that are not black, but then you can have another transgression on a black shale, and then you get a high stand where you have the maximum flooding surface. I mean, the sea's at its maximum level at that point. Okay, then it all starts, you have your high stand, and the delta begins to build out. And there's your delta fringe, there's your tidal flat, there's more of the tidal flat building out to the south, and then you can get another little transition in there, transgressive system, and then the delta reaches and builds out into the area. So this would be like at Burbank, for example, where that delta is. Anyway, these deltas build out, but this is how each one of those, and then you get another transgressive shale, start all over again. So that's the overall sequence. And so I am going to drive you crazy and back it up, and then go through it real fast. Yeah, so that's how it looks like. And that's what geologists look at all the time to try to figure out how these things work. And when we did that, we realized that we were wrong about some things. Like I said, you get new data, you figure out you've done some. It's, you know, things that apparent sometimes are just not right. My brother-in-law lives over in Stone Canyon in Owasso, and there's hardly any soil there. If you know that area, it's all limestone. And so on their septic tanks, they dig a septic tank, and then instead of putting laterals out, they they put a sprinkler system in. And it sprinkles the yard usually at 5 in the morning or whatever. So that non-potable water sprinkles the yard. So it was a hot summer day, and a new neighbor had moved in, and I guess they turned the system on. He had about 3 kids. And he looks outside, and they're all running around in the sprinklers because they think, hey, we got a house that has sprinklers all over the place. And so they're out there dancing in the sprinklers. So he went over and informed them, of course, well, so you have to be, so it wasn't what they expected, is what I'm saying. It wasn't what we expected here. And so if you look, we realized that there's more sequences here than we thought. There's the red fork A, which we call the lower, and the red fork B, we call the middle, red fork C, but then we realized this pink line up here has all these fingers. And this is all what we call condensed sections. And as you go down dip into the Anadarko Basin, they expand. And so if you look at this next slide, so here's the pink line up here with these little thin sections, but as you go into the basin, they expand to whole new, the prograding wedge is what we call it as geologists. So it gets quite thick, thousands of feet thick. And so that's the Red Fork prograding wedge. We don't have that here in the Cherokee platform. We get a little that as you go toward the Arkoma, but it kind of runs out at that point. So what we were able to do finally, this is my whole story to get to this point, is we took our time to put the deposition environments along with each stand that we netted out. And we just did it kind of like, well, we thought we ought to do it. We didn't know the reason why at the time. And then when we were mapping, we realized how important that was because it showed us we were able to actually differentiate the sands when we were mapping. And I'll show you a picture to make this all clear. Because when you map all these sands together, it just looks like a big, massive sand. And you can't really tell anything. But when you use the deposition environment, then you can tell which delta is which and actually map the channels out for exploration. And so we were able to have, there's the Red Fork A channel system, Red Fork B, Red Fork C, and then Red Fork D. That's that East Clinton thing I showed you earlier with the estuarine. And it made a huge, huge difference in the project to be able to do that. So that's why geologists love geology, because we get to figure things out. And so I'll show you basically, this is like if we're in outer space, this is a view of how the delta would have formed. So here's, let me back up here. There's the Bartlesville Delta. And then the Red Fork Delta comes in, but it comes in west of that, because the deltas don't like to be on top of each other. Okay? So it's just, they like to, because it's denser in that area. And so it builds down between what we call the Nemaha Ridge and where the Bartlesville is. And it continues to go south, but then the depositional slope, that's the DS, moves to the west and it crosses over, and that's when you get this Cherokee to Waukeeta channel system together. There they are. And it continues to build. Depositional slope changes. Most of the sediment now is going to the Anadarko Basin. Now you're going to start getting granite wash coming off the mountain to Wichita Ledge. Continues to build. And then you have your last bit, that's the Clinton channel system, and it goes off to the west. So that's the delta. So that's how the delta forms. And like I said, we were the first group to actually put that together, and it was fun and to figure it out. People had different parts of it. It's like the scientists were blindfolded looking at different parts of the elephant, trying to figure out what it was, and we were able to put the elephant together. So we'll go through that one more time, just a little faster. There it goes. So this is really narrow. It almost covers all of Oklahoma. It's a huge, huge delta across that. The Bartlesville didn't make nearly that size of delta. So let's talk about production a little bit. This Des Moines system, I don't have it divided as much, but you see the Des Moines in here is, has the total, oil production. Of course, this is Anadarko Basin. This is for John Mitchell, and we've got about 12% of the Des Moines produces oil in the Anadarko, and then gas, it's more like 11%. Of course, the huge amount of gas from the Hugoton comes in on this, so you have to kind of look at them separately. But where I'm trying to get to here is back to Shane's point. Okay, so these are the horizontal completions now, which have made a huge difference in this whole play. And mostly in the Anadarko Basin, in the Des Moines, in the Cherokee was mostly Cleveland, and then we had Granite Wash. So those are the two major players in the Anadarko. But now we're starting to get to Red Fork. And this is a ternary diagram that just shows, and I like it because it shows where you might expect a reservoir to be as far as for horizontal drilling. And these are some of the top, the Osage Shale, the Woodford Shale, the Merrimack Shale. These are some of the top zones. And we mapped this based on ductility and so on. You can see the Red Fork sandstone looks like it should be pretty good. These are the major plays out in the Anadarko right now. This is the Cleveland sand out here, and this is some Pennsylvania Granite Wash right in here. The Red Fork didn't show yet, but the Red Fork is changing, and this is a key thing to understand. We began to notice that a lot of the companies were drilling Red Fork wells in old fields and coming up with really good wells. Okay, so that's a head scratcher. You don't need to see that. And but this is an example. This well, for example, is a Putnam field. They drill right in the middle of the channel, the Red Fork Channel, and this well has cumed 237,000 barrels of oil, 0.7 BCF. It's on the road for 400,000 barrels of oil, 1.6 BCF. That's pretty amazing to have all these basically depleted vertical wells, and you can drill right in the field and make that much oil. But this is South Thomas, that one that I call the Birchwood Delta. It's looking, it's on the road. They again drill right between all these vertical wells. They drill right between, and the EUR is expected to be about 883,000 barrels of oil and 3.3 BCF. Pretty good wells, huh? This is the New Cherokee play out there that Newburn's on, out west, and 24 West, and it's they're looking at about 400,000 barrels per well roughly, and 4.6 BCF, and these plays. And again, they're in between other plays. That's really a new play. And then this is one of the newest ones. This is Middleburg Field to the south. And again, they're in the middle of the Red Fork sandstone. And so far, this is a pretty recent completion in the last 3 months. 67,000 barrels of oil and 2.4 BCF is the current cum on that. So the question comes, and this is the application to here in the Osage, is the why? Why can you do that? Because that kind of goes against all that you kind of expect. A lot of people have been going and looking at the Red Fork in areas where there had not been production, but then suddenly they find that they go in the area where there's known production, they're making really great wells. Well, part of the reason is the saturation. There's so much saturation in there, both from Woodford and Pennsylvania shales. So it's so you've got a really intensely saturated oil and gas zone, okay, like you do here in Osage. And so that's number one. You have to have that because of the high amount of oil and gas saturation. Now, This map just shows the Woodford is in black and the Pennsylvanians in green. The Pennsylvania tends to be more gas prone, the Woodford more oil prone, but it really depends on where you are. So if you're with a Pennsylvania, for example, if you're up higher on the delta, it's more gas prone, and lower on the delta, you're getting more oil prone type source rock. So that's the first thing, saturation. The second thing is the fracturing, and it's important to know and understand the fracturing. There's a lot of fracturing in the Anadarko Basin, a lot of fracturing here, and you can see that the oil is coming up through the fractures, and that's these green arrows. We noticed this when we were doing a lot of our studies, that across these particular big major strike slip faults in the Anadarko Basin, you could see you'd have gas on one side, oil on top of it, gas on the other side. In the Oswego, and the Hog Shooter, and the Cleveland, and the Red Fork, you just saw it over and over again, that there was clearly oil coming up through those big fractures in saturating those fields. And so that's an important component of understanding the potential for additional production. And then the other thing with the Red Fork and the Bartlesville is, again, we'll get back to the dirty rock thing, okay? Back to dirty dancing, the dirty rock. It is as you can see, there's a lot of pseudomatrix, there's metamorphic rock fragments, there's clay, and these clays actually are, illite chloride actually protect the porosity to some degree. The kaolinite can block pores, but in the end, it winds up with a reservoir that has about an average of 3% primary porosity, but up to 20% secondary. And a lot of this secondary porosity is very fine. It's in the smaller pores, it's in the clay matrix, it's in the, and so that's why it can be so loaded, and the vertical wells are not getting, I don't think, even 10% of the recovery of these wells. So that's why you can go with a horizontal well and pick up, 6 to 10 times what you would expect. And so, and then the final thing, which we don't have so much here, but there in the Anadarko Basin, is you have pressure. Lots and lots of pressure in the Red Fork, and in the Marl Springer and the Red Fork there. And that always helps in depth, of course. And so those are the components, and that's why when you look at these old fields, say in the Osage that that Shane was showing you all, don't be afraid, to go back into those zones. I mean, there are a lot of potential in the old fields, and that's why I was asking about what the recovery is. So you want to look at the rock, make sure you understand the rock, and then you want to look at the recovery factors and see, if you understand the rock, you understand recovery factors, then that really opens up the potential to drill horizontal wells. And there's a lot of new technology now, a lot of new fracking technology that's really improved, and so there's some tremendous opportunities in the Red Fork, in the Bartlesville, in this whole Cherokee section to explore and to develop new plays. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. So. All right. Yes, Shane.
How do we know the Ozark was high at that time?
Well, we did a lot of study on that, and I don't think it was exposed. Let's say in the Nemaha Ridge wasn't either. It was more a matter of how much subsidence there was. And the subsidence was not as high in the Ozark or where the Nemaha was. That's the thing you have to look at it. So, yeah, the diagram is somewhat misleading in that, because it looks like, yeah, it's sticking way up. No, it just didn't subside as much. All right? Yes?
Did you
prepare drilling north from Park near Kansas because there is a migration of oil and gas?
I didn't understand, did we prepare drilling mud?
Yeah, did you prepare drilling north from Park of Oklahoma near the border of Kansas because there's areas for migration of oil and gas?
Yeah, there's, we have, my company hasn't worked up there, we work more in the Anadarko. But we do see migration up along fractures, faults, and so on. It's interesting, if you look at some of the fields in Kansas, like the Central Kansas uplift,
Yeah.
it's actually Woodford oil, but it's degraded Woodford oil, which means it's traveled a long way. So so, you know, we could argue with is the oil migration near or far? It's both.
Yeah.
You know, you're generating so much oil. I mean, the Woodford, let's see, I think I calculated Woodford was 300 billion barrels of oil that it's generated. That's a lot of oil, and there's not, so these rocks are pretty saturated.
Yeah,
And
because I'm working now on the Pennsylvania coast, southern Kansas, and
Yes.
there's a lot of oil over there. So.
and keep in mind about the Red Fork. Now, like I say, it'll be more type 3 as you go
Yeah.
more north, away from the basin, so.
Thank you.
Yes.
All that,
Is all that productive, you mean?
That's just where the channels are, and sometimes they're not productive.
The channels, it's interesting, the channels are often mostly productive where they turn against the structural grain. And the way we figure that, and then they tend to be tight as they go straight up dip. And so what we're thinking is that the ones that turned against structural grain, you had enough gas trapped in that for enough time that it actually formed a pseudo trap there for a while until oil could get migrated into it. And then the ones that went straight up dip, it just, the hydrocarbons didn't stay, and so it was water, and so it cements water. And that's what we see mostly, that type of thing. So yeah, it varies. I was working for a company, and we were seismically looking at the Red Fork out in that area around Thomas, and I showed them how you could find the channels, right? But then they said, great, okay, you're done, we don't need you anymore. I said, wait a minute, you need to know about the diagenesis. Oh, no, we're okay. So they called me back over a year later and said, well, we drilled 3 wells and they're all tight. I go, yeah, everybody should have asked about the diagenesis, because you drilled them in straight channel of it's going up there. So don't do that. Yes? All right.
You're talking about the, oh, sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I can't tell that it's on. Quick question on this, you were talking about this being a dirty delta, dirty sandstone. And are you calling it dirty because of the clays?
I'm calling it dirty because of not so much the clays, of the rock fragments and the feldspar grains. And they turn into clays, right?
Yeah,
The
that's
network rock
actually-
fragments, and so they turn into clays. And so now the chloride's important in that it forms a depth, right? And so it really keeps the pores open. The chloride does more than the illite does. But no, it's mainly you got sedimentary rock fragments, you've got metamorphic rock fragments, you've got feldspar, and other constituents too. Those are dirty. That's why I call it dirty.
Okay,
Because the thought is what? Feldspar can't travel. I mean, as a geologist, I was taught that feldspar grains would be destroyed by the time you got to the Mississippi Delta. But if you look at the Mississippi Delta, it's got feldspar in it. Okay, so that's not true.
are you seeing any trials?
Yeah.
Because I see some trial kaolin
Yeah.
in the Mississippi.
Yeah, I know that I can, and there's quite a bit of kaolin, and some of that could be trial. So I don't know that. I don't know that I have that. Yeah, I don't know. All right, thank you. Good question. Yes.
Councilman Reddick on the Mineral Council. I'm not a geologist, I'm not anything like that. I've always heard that the Anadarko Basin down there gas, natural gas. And is that true? Is there more gas than people drill down there for gas? Or do they just drill for both?
Well, they really drill for both, but there's lots of gas, because mainly is the depth of the source rock. So, as the Woodford's a major source rock. So as it gets to the depth, once it passes below 10,000 feet, it's generating mostly gas. And so it does generate. But you also have other zones, like in the Pennsylvania, they tend to be more gas prone overall. But so that there's a lot of source rocks that develop gas down there. But it's mainly a depth factor, burial factor. Deeper it gets buried, more gas develops. Sure. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay. Yes.
Do you see only the depth factor or the structural geology factor also? The joint and the fault associated with the gas?
Yeah, I think that we were seeing reservoirs, we were working in the Mississippian, that clearly we feel when you looked at the rock had been oil primarily, but now they were gas prone, and that it looked like the gas had moved into lake, and so we see a lake surge. We're seeing a lake surge of gas moving up out of that Anadarko Basin now, right now. So it's very slow, of course. Yeah, the one thing I'll show you real quick that's interesting on those. So look at this map. If you think these faults aren't real, look at the river. The river comes up here, follows that one, hits this one, turns, comes to the next one, and turns again. So these things, they're actually reflect. I don't think there's a big fault at the surface, but they're certainly impacting the paleogeography of the surface. So they're very, very real. Any other questions? Any answers? Oh, what answer? Back. Yes.
Chlorite and illite
Yes.
preserves porosity
More the chloride than the illite.
but destroys the permeability.
Yeah, chloride actually is typically the chloride we see in the reservoir forms around the grains and actually protects the porosity. It holds it. I'll show you. Whereas the illite can move, not so much though. It doesn't seem like it moves. Nothing like a kaolin, of course. Here's the chloride. See how it forms a boundary? So it protects against the syntaxial overgrowth of pores and keeps your pores open. So that's whereas the kaolinite and so on. Here's a clay here. They can the kaolinite and illite can be more occlusive, in the pore in the